Welcome to today's event, Independent Bus Operators and the National Bus Strategy, organised by Landor and sponsored by Passenger. I should say right at the start, this event is being recorded, so if you've got a problem with that, you better leave now. I'm Bill Hiron. I'm the owner and managing director of Eastern Transport Holdings. And we run around 140 buses mainly in Essex and Suffolk on a mixture of commercial and tendered local bus and school services. I'm also privileged to be chair of ALBUM. Now, ALBUM is the Association of Local Bus Managers and represents the non-aligned sector of the bus industry. We have over 160 members representing around about 60 companies, which is 36 private businesses, the 8 municipal operators, 5 second-tier groups, the Isle of Man Transport Company, and 13 associated companies, principally suppliers. Our membership base includes individuals employed by a bus company not aligned to any of the big 5 PLCs. Between them, ALBUM members companies operate around 6,000 buses, which is about 15% of the 40,000 buses used by local operators across Great Britain. So ALBUM effectively is equivalent to Britain's 3rd largest bus operator, behind Stagecoach and First, but ahead of Go Ahead and Arriva. The National Bus Strategy is a potentially huge opportunity for the industry. And by the industry, I mean the wider industry, so including both operators and local transport authorities. But it's also a huge challenge. We have a great lineup of expert speakers today. We've got Claire Walters from Bus Users UK. She's their Chief Executive. We have Sarah Bott, who's Head of Business Development at Passenger. We have Chris Cheek, who's a transport expert and author, and we have Craig Temple, MD of Connexions Buses. Now, I'll say a little bit more about each of our speakers before they do their piece. And once again, of course, we have Passenger to thank for sponsoring this event. It's really great. We've got over 200 delegates attending, so that really indicates the importance that operators and local authorities and others are attaching to the National Bus Strategy. Broadly, we're going to listen to all the speakers in turn and then do a combined Q&A at the end. The exception is Claire Walters. She's our first speaker, and unfortunately she has to go off for another meeting. So we're going to listen to Claire first. Claire is then going to do her own mini Q&A, and then we'll move on to the other 3 speakers and do the Q&A for those 3 at the end. Questions for panelists can be posted in the questions box, which is hopefully on your screen. You can do that as the speakers are speaking, as you think of those questions, or at the end. It's up to you. I will attempt to sift them, stroke combine them, and ask them in an expert and erudite fashion when we get to that point. So, moving on to our first speaker, Claire Walters. Since becoming Chief Executive in 2012, Claire Walters has transformed Bus Users into a registered charity that campaigns for inclusive, accessible transport. Under her leadership, Bus Users is now an approved alternative dispute resolution body for the bus and coach industry and part of the Sustainable Transport Alliance, a group promoting the benefits of public, shared and active travel. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Claire, who's going to give us her presentation, and then as I say, we'll have a Q&A with Claire after she's finished speaking. So Claire, the floor or the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Bill. Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here talking to and about the role of independent operators in making the National Bus Strategy work well. To be honest, it's a terrible title, Bus Back Better, but okay, let's move on to what it's all about instead. I think it's fair to say that pretty much everybody has been gagging for some kind of bus strategy, hoping that they'll be at the top of the pile when we're talking about transport for years, as opposed to an afterthought in so many of the discussions about it. So we do need to be really glad now that it's here, despite the many hurdles and the many preposterous deadlines that it contains. We do need to at least welcome the fact that it exists. Smaller operators shouldn't need me to tell them how important a role bus plays in our society, but I like talking about it, so I'm going to do it anyway. As you should all know, buses connect us all to everything we need in life, and if the bus wasn't around, we'd have an awful lot more cars on the road, more pollution in the air, and nowhere to go for the 40% of Brits who catch a bus every week just to talk to another human being. Imagine the lockdown they've had. We don't often talk about buses as a tool against loneliness and social exclusion, but there's plenty of research out there now that shows it really is. Despite the emphasis that's often given on older people and disabled people, surprisingly, it's actually young people who are the hardest hit when buses go missing. They're the means whereby young people mostly manage their lives, get about independently, get to the education outlet of their choice. So if buses aren't around, it just makes life harder for people to follow the course or the career they want, or even just to get to and from an entry-level job. So, okay, what are we trying to achieve with this strategy? I think it's clear that they're trying to address the somewhat old-fashioned image of bus travel. It's not a reasonable image, but you cannot deny that people still feel that somehow it's an old-fashioned thing to do to catch a bus. It would be wonderful if a government policy changed the approach that people have to the way buses look and feel. I'm not sure a political strategy is very likely to do that, and it's claiming it wants to make buses cool. Politicians making things cool doesn't generally do an awful lot, but hey, we can but hope. Certainly the strategy wants to address the reliability concerns of people who don't often use the bus, and it wants to encourage bus passengers back to the bus and to encourage non-users to try it. These are all worthwhile ambitions that we have to be able to get behind. What's clear is this strategy certainly links in with other government strategies and programmes like the Levelling Up strategy and the decarbonisation agenda, both of which are important in trying to ensure the bus industry as a whole gets back on its feet as soon as possible. It's also good to see the link to a cleaner, greener and more inclusive future for everyone, recognising that bus is vital to achieving this. And local bus in particular, the smaller local routes, they're critical. So, what are we being promised? Well, we're being promised an awful lot. We're being promised frequency, inclusivity, bus priority, integration, smarter ticketing, low-cost travel and cleaner buses. I'm not sure how buses could get any cleaner after the year we've just had, given that they are about as clean as most operating tables in the morning. So, okay, it's all fantastic. Let's not forget, though, where we're starting from and who's meant to deliver this. Even now, with restrictions being binned totally by the sound of it, there's still talk about keeping face coverings on public transport. There's been endless negativity around public transport as if it's somehow to blame when there's yet to be a single case traced back to bus. I'm not at all suggesting that we throw caution to the wind, but I just can't see any justification for singling out transport as the sort of plague pit of COVID. It's a subject I've spent quite a lot of time talking to DFT comms about. Obviously, I've had not very much success with that one thus far. Anyway, apart from that, before the pandemic even, we were struggling with a long period of austerity where many bus subsidies were cut or removed altogether. And we also lost a large proportion of experienced transport planners from local authorities. Now, as they're the people who are supposed to be leading the charge on this, that's more than a little concerning. Let's also not forget the long-standing inequality of service between urban and rural areas. And the other problem we've seen is an inability to change services and subsidy provision when work-life habits change. We've seen a bit of that over the last year, but it's been a weird year. But imagine being a 16-year-old who's managed to get a job at McDonald's starting at 5 AM or finishing at 11 PM or midnight, and then trying to be sure you'd get a bus both to get to work and home again. And there's hardly any cities that give you that option, and almost no rural areas. So this is a big challenge. Oh, and by the way, the budget for all this, £3 billion. Sounds a lot of money, doesn't it? But, you know, when you sit there looking that it costs about, well, it probably shares out to about 250 million per authority. That still sounds like quite a lot of money, but then you look at a nice green, clean double-decker bus. That is going to cost you around £250,000. So I think it's absolutely clear that this budget is going to need to be looked at again if they're going to get anywhere near the sorts of stuff that they're promising. If everybody's going to be able to walk to a bus stop, click their fingers, and a bus is going to arrive within 10 minutes, that's, you know, 3 billion ain't going to do that. There are also requirements in the strategy to engage with local communities in the planning of services. It's a very fundamental requirement. And we all know that most local authorities are either not very good at this or just don't have the staff or experience to do this right now. Oh, and by the way, they also had to commit to being part of either an enhanced partnership scheme or a franchising programme to ensure any access to any of that £3 billion, and for ongoing bus funding by the end of June, just gone. So if they hadn't done it, what happens next? Nobody seems to be terribly clear, to be perfectly honest. But they have said that if it's down to local authority intransigence, the bus companies won't be penalised for that. I'm sure that's of huge relief to all of you. However, it doesn't really help you get further forward. Now, you also are, I'm sure, involved in developing bus service improvement plans, because that's a requirement that has to be done by October this year. And that has to be based on public consultation of some description. Now, as an organisation, bus users really concerned with ensuring communities have access to decision makers, we've been asking ourselves how we're going to ensure that the needs of communities don't get swamped by the panic to just get any sort of proposal together to safeguard the access to funds. So as the POS rates increase and the deadlines grow nearer, let's have a look at what these requirements actually are. So a bus service improvement plan, a BSIP. Let's have some more jargon in this industry, that's what we all need. Now that has to be developed in collaboration, as it says in the strategy, with local people, businesses, etc. Now, bus users produced a 10-point guide to producing a BSIP, and if you haven't actually seen that on our website yet, you might want to just look. Even if you've got one already, you might want to check it actually ticks those boxes. Next thing you have to have is a bus passenger charter, which meets the local passengers' needs. Now, this charter, one of the things that doesn't tend to get looked at enough is that it includes the hundreds of thousands of people who don't have a bank account, let alone a smartphone or a contactless bank card. So you do need to make sure that people have the ability to pay by cash at some point and somewhere, and without all the fancy schmancy stuff that everybody's so keen on. I'm no Luddite, but I do know there's an awful lot of people out there who just can't access this stuff. Then you also have to have a bus advisory board set up locally to hold everyone to account. I'm not going to focus on that just now, but I do think there are all sorts of possible trips and falls in that, because trying to get the right mix of people that are actually going to be useful on that board is something that we've wrestled with over many years, trying to help bus companies set up passenger groupings and that sort of stuff. It's not easy to get the right mix of people who are not just there to put their own particular bugbear across. The other thing that everywhere's going to have is a local centre of excellence to train all the staff in the skills they need to do these jobs. I'm not going to focus on that one today. It's a whole other ball game that's going to need a whole heap of extra money, trainers, competent people and all the rest of it. So, okay, so there's plenty to do. And the problem is you can't actually meet these three main requirements without very good quality community engagement. It's just not possible. We know this because we've been doing exactly that for 35 years. There are lots of organisations out in your areas which have detailed knowledge of the needs of various parts of your local populations. And to be honest, it tends not to be the people who turn up through rain and snow to every council meeting to complain about something, possibly the same something. Anyone who's been to local authority run consultation meetings, you're probably recognising what I'm talking about here. That's not a local consultation. Local independent operators are completely key to those discussions because they already know their market, they live their market, and they're hearing what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong every day. So they probably the best source of information in terms of a starting point for those discussions. Organisations like Bus Users, Campaign for Better Transport, Sustainable Transport Alliance, we're all around and we're here to help authorities get this right. I'm sure most of the people on this call have already been in touch with them well before now to let them know what you can offer and what you need help with. No bus planning or any part of a local authority's sustainable transport plan, which they have to have, can work well for the community without all the operators coming to the table. This is not a charter for the big five to run roughshod over all the other organisations who are running operating services in the community. It doesn't work. If you think of it as a jigsaw transport, you can't make it work if there are pieces missing. And this is finally an opportunity for all the players to come to the table and cooperate without the Competition and Markets Authority throwing its weight around and frightening everyone to death. They've all been told, ignore this, this is not for you. So you should be able to get involved in that without any risk. Most importantly, local authorities need support to get the measure of what their local services actually do and whether it currently meets the needs of their residents, rather than just being a tick box exercise or looking at what's always happened and what's always been done. That may not be what's needed anymore, and you're in a good position to talk to them about that. There really isn't much point in taking an off-the-shelf plan, which I'm sure plenty of people are already offering, I imagine, which will commit the authority to a raft of things that have little or no bearing on the needs of their particular community, just to keep money coming for buses. It's incredibly tempting, I can understand that. But if you're ending up committed to things that you really don't need in your area, that's not helping anyone. Communities really cannot thrive unless the services are there for them now and into the future. If you want to take away three things from this session today, let them be these. The improvement plan should be based on local feedback, so local people can feel the benefit of whatever happens and whatever disruption there is. The charter that you produce should be a living, useful document, not just some downloaded Google Doc that sits in a shelf and does nothing. The advisory boards will need to be an authentic voice for all the different communities served, not just the loudest. As Bill said, this is a huge opportunity to make sustainable transport an option for everyone. We cannot and must not let it slip past us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. that was a really good starter for 10. Can I remind everyone to put their questions in the box? While people are thinking about the questions they want to ask, I've got one to kick off using Chairman's privilege, if I may, Claire.
Of course you have.
I mean, the 3 billion, of course, by the time you take out the funding that's been allocated to zero emission buses, and we understand the recovery funding from September to March is also going to come out of that, I think is going to look more like 1.5 billion. So it amplifies the problem you've outlined, perhaps even more starkly. As you've said, the public and the stakeholders at large have been promised an awful lot in Bus Back Better. Do you think we as an industry have been set up to fail?
What a very cynical point of view. I couldn't possibly comment on the politics behind it, but I do think that it's the challenge has been thrown down. This is what they want. And now I think it's up to the industry and the local authorities and passengers to let them know whether it's achievable. So I think we all have to start out on the journey in good faith and say, okay, well, if you want this, that means we have to do this, and we need X number of vehicles and they need to be green and clean. So that means this. And then once you start getting the budget together, then obviously you've got Album talking to DFT, you've got CPT talking to DFT, we've got us talking to DFT. When it starts to be clear that you cannot get everything they have been promising for that money, then you need to go back to them and say, so do you want to take away some of the requirements, or do you want to add some budget? Because you can't have both. So I think just saying it's not enough. I mean, I think anybody who knows anything about the industry saw the amount of money, did a quick back of the fag packet calculation and said never going to happen. But I don't think that's the way to handle this in terms of the politics. So if you start from the principle that we can achieve this and we can do that, and then we're going to need this to get the rest done, that's probably the only way that you can keep your own integrity on this without actually just ending up in a head-to-head big battle with the budgeteers at DFT or Cabinet Office or wherever the money's allocated.
Thank you, Claire. Can I remind you to please enter your questions in the box. I've got one here. Let me just ask you another one from me while I'm digesting this, Claire. How do we get over the issue with local politicians? I mean, clearly a lot of what Bus Back Better requires is going to involve being courageous, to quote Sir Humphrey, and in many cases we're going to have to do things that will be seen as penalising the motorist, and we all know that that's not good for votes in local elections, or any election for that matter. How can bus users in particular help us as an industry in getting that message?
I'm sure a lot of you have done all this kind of stuff already. Well, I think the first thing you're probably going to have to do is to pick and choose a few key politicians in your area, one or two who you think are probably open to change and the loudest voice in opposition. So the absolutely die-hard motorists are everything, and I'm not giving up my car for any reason. And then I think you need to get them to agree to come and look at the hotspots in your area. Where are the parts that are really congested that cause major problems for people? And try and get them on a bus and take them round to see what the problems are. Now, I know your die-hard motorist would probably have to be given a large dose of Rohypnol to put him on the bus in the first place. But I think until people actually see what difference it makes, if you can get them on a bus which actually has passengers on it, so that they can talk to some of the passengers about what their daily experience is, and take them on the routes that are most problematic. Because it's easy to set up a PR visit where you talk to the people on brilliant services that always work, but that's not what you're trying to get at here. You're trying to get at the ones where a bit of road priority change would make a huge difference and make the whole thing much more digestible for the average commuter, or the person trying to get to hospital, or the person who needs to go and pick somebody up at short notice. I think it's also worth setting up meetings, local authority meetings, with different community leaders who are not there specifically for transport reasons. They're there for their own community reasons. So you might get local people who are involved in disability organisations or elderly care organisations, and then talk to them about the use of public transport that they need to make. Carers have to make their way from one home to the other. In some rural areas, they get given car allowances, but actually in most cities, they're expected to go there on public transport, which might come as a shock to some of you. They get paid pretty rubbish, and they're not always given free travel on buses. But they, again, that's an interest group that the council probably doesn't hear from, except maybe from the people who own the businesses. So I think it's worth building up a catalogue of support that shows them that it's frankly going to be easier to do the work required than it is to avoid doing the work required. It's not straightforward, and you've all got better things to do with your life than try and re-educate politicians, but I don't think you're going to get past any of this unless some of the politicians are on side.
Thank you, Claire. That's interesting. We've got a couple of questions come in. One person's asking, are you worried about what happens when the money runs out? Are we going to, I think the implication is, are we just going to fall off a cliff when the 3 billion is spent?
Well, I think that's one of the questions that really needs to be put in the whole discussion about whether the budget's enough, because there's the usual caveat in the strategy that says, you know, you're going to have support for 3 years and then we expect it to all be self-financing. There isn't a country in the world that has heavily regulated buses that doesn't end up having to subsidise them. And in most other countries, it's not actually a big deal. It's not seen as a terrible thing. It's seen as a useful societal support. I think it's perfectly possible that some areas might end up having a really, viable bus network. But I can't see how that's ever going to work for some of the smaller routes, the rural routes, the small places that need to connect to the bigger, faster routes. Those services are always going to need some support. So the idea that it's all going to be a 10-minute service in pretty much every conurbation without any kind of public subsidy does seem a bit of a fairy tale to me. So yes, is the short answer. I am worried about them saying no more. Because what are you supposed to do then? You can't magic it up. And the voters certainly aren't going to be happy if you suddenly go back to them saying, OK, we need to double your local taxes because we need to fund the buses.
Thank you, Claire. And another one for you. How can small parish councils who have no buses in their area get their local LTAs to agree to provide a service when they won't even, in some cases, speak to the parish council in question?
Well, that's a very good question, and actually there've been some examples in Norfolk in the not too distant past. You'll know our chair is Ben Colson, who used to run Norfolk Green, and they were trying to run services, and they couldn't get any sense out of their local authority. So they ended up with all the parish councils ganging together and putting in teeny tiny sums of money from their discretionary funds to run a pilot scheme to see how it would work, and then presented the evidence of that to the county council. And it was quite a neat way of saying, you can't tell me there's no demand because look, we've already demonstrated the demand. I think where having the national bus strategy will allow you to wave it round your heads and go and, if necessary, obviously not physically, metaphorically beat them over the head with this and saying, but you have to, it's in the government's plan, especially if that happens to be a Conservative run council. Even if it doesn't, Labour Party policy is also to have publicly funded buses. So it's only the people in between or the other parties that you might have any arguments from, but this is coming into law, so it's not like they can say we don't want to talk to you. They don't have a choice.
Thank you. Another interesting question here. Claire, what awareness is there, and what are the expectations out there of actual passengers thinking about the Bus Back Better strategy? I suppose the essence of that question is how much of it is filtered out to your average bus user, as opposed to people like us who spend our lives reading stuff like this.
Well, it's obviously not as juicy a story as some that have been out on the headlines recently, but it depends, I think, on people's, if they're environmentally aware, that is something that will have lodged in their brain. So young people are more likely to know about the fact that we're supposed to be getting improvements to buses than many other people, older people, middle-aged people. But I do think it's going to need a lot more knowledge. But again, that's something that the local bus companies should be able to help with, and the people that they've already got associated with them. The problem is getting this out to people who either have a car or who think the answer to all our problems are electric cars, which it absolutely will make no difference whatsoever. Because, as I'm sure most of you know, there's a lot more pollution comes off the tyres on the road than out of the tailpipe. So electric cars are not the answer. Buses have to be the answer for most people, because most people don't live next door or within 10 minutes of a railway station. So buses will be the solution to this problem. We are trying to do our tiny little best to get awareness out into the newspapers, which are not terribly interested in transport stories unless somebody's been run over. And I think the PR departments in all the bus companies that exist, where there are PR companies, and I'm sure not everyone has them, they need to start doing their bit as well. And I think it ought to be a subject that Alban might be talking about amongst its membership, of how they raise awareness. The problem with raising awareness, as the question implies, is that you also raise expectations. But if the expectations aren't there, you're not going to be able to persuade anybody to give you more money for it. So the government has made a promise. For anyone who believes that the government should make a promise and keep it, then that's something that ought to be put out into the world and get people to think about it. In flat terms, I don't think the average person on the street would know that there's a national bus strategy, but there have been some bits and pieces of coverage that says this is going to happen. And the Prime Minister is a well-known bus nut, apparently. So hopefully they will start pushing things as the plans start to come in. So you need to get local media asking for the bus service improvement plan. That's the thing that you want to do, and then start a bit of public consultation, some vox pops, asking your passengers what they think, and start to ramp it up slowly that way.
Thank you, Claire. There are a couple more questions, but I'm conscious of the time, and some of them are perhaps more appropriate for the wider panel discussion anyway. So, Claire, I know you've got another engagement to go to. Can I thank you very, very much indeed for your contribution? It's been a really good kickstart to the discussion, which I'm sure we're going to have after the next three speakers. Can I also say thank you on behalf of operators generally, certainly Alban, for the valuable work that bus users does in keeping our feet firmly nailed to the floor and reminding us that our customers are actually vaguely important to us, because it's very easy to forget them especially with things like Bus Back Better, where we're spending half our life dealing with legislation and plans and strategies. It's very easy to forget that actually our existence depends on the people that pay their fares or use their passes to travel on our buses every day. So thank you once again, Claire. Very good to hear you speak once again, and we will see you soon. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. And if there are any questions that come in later, do let me know and I'll send you some replies for them. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a good event. Thank you all. Bye. Thank you, Claire. Okay. Can I remind you once again, as our next three speakers, who are going to go one after the other, are speaking, please feel free to post any questions in the box that you have. So our next speaker is Sarah Bott. Sarah is Head of Business Development at UK Public Transport and app and website provider Passenger. Passenger are, of course, the sponsor of today's event. I just had to slip that in, just to earn some brownie points from Claire and a small discount over the next bit of myTrip that gets added on. Passenger delivers scalable technology to public transport operators of all sizes, including mobile app ticketing, travel information apps, and websites. Sarah's role has been instrumental in helping Passenger launch its latest product, which is myTrip, which is an app designed for the smaller operator, offering live bus tracking and mobile ticketing. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honour to be joined by such a fantastic panel of speakers, and I'm personally looking forward to sharing with you our thoughts on the national bus strategy for smaller independent operators and how Passenger can help fulfil some of the objectives laid out. It goes without saying that it's time to bring people back to bus. You know, we all want a future where public transport is the first choice to help reduce congestion on our roads and improve our air quality. With technological advancement happening at pace and the important conversations around climate change and net zero, now is the time to put shared transport to the front of the agenda and bus back better. According to Baroness Veer, sorry, I just need to change my screen, sorry. Apologies. Oh, apologies, I'm just trying to change my screen. Here we go. There we go. According to Baroness Veer, now is the time to bring people back to bus. You know, we all want a future where public transport is the first choice to help reduce congestion on our roads and improve our air quality. Sorry, oh gosh. According to Baroness Veer, the national bus strategy is the biggest shake-up to buses in a generation, and it's been designed to deliver transformational change. In its own words, the national bus strategy is setting out an ambitious vision to improve bus services in England. Bus Back Better is all about partnership and making buses a practical and attractive alternative to the private car. According to Chris Cheek, who I'm looking forward to hearing from after this, decarbonisation is likely to be the bus industry's saviour. Modal switch from car to public transport is an essential component of a successful policy towards net zero. The opportunities this gives the bus industry are huge. Latest statistics suggest that for each 5% of car demand shifted, bus patronage can more than double. So we need to avoid a car-led recovery as we come out of this pandemic, and this requires a shift to the way people choose to travel. At Passenger, our company mission is to help build a future where shared transport is the first choice. And we do this by creating technological solutions that are easy to use and intuitive. By doing this, we can help to accelerate adoption and remove barriers of usage. For those of you not familiar with Passenger, we provide a digital service platform for operators of all sizes. We call it Passenger Cloud, and it powers all of our apps and all of our websites. We currently work with around 30 premium or what we call white label operators such as Blackpool Transport, Reading Buses, Transdev, NCT, our local operator based here in Bournemouth, Yellow Buses. And in the last couple of months, you may have seen in the press, we've rolled out 17 apps for the Go Ahead group, such as Brighton and Hove, Oxford Bus Company, Go North East and Go South Coast. We've got additional websites launching later this month. As a company, we are huge advocates for digital change as we aim to reduce barriers for all. The pandemic has, of course, accelerated adoption of digital technologies. You know, even our grandparents know how to video call now, and adoption of smartphones is growing around the world. Market research from Statista shows us that in 2020, 87% of all adults in the UK owned a smartphone, By 2025, this is projected to reach close to 95% of the total population. So mobile technology, while still growing, has become intrinsic to our day-to-day lives. And on average, people in the UK check their phone every 12 minutes. As operators often tell me, kids might lose their money or their coats or their smart cards, but they very rarely lose their phones. So the potential growth for transport app usage is only set to continue. As we build back better from this pandemic, better buses will be vital to getting the economy moving again. And the challenge will be encouraging people to go to bus travel, and we can do this by improving the whole bus experience, whether it's cleaner, more reliable buses or more accessible journey planning information. Most of the operators that we work with are heavily investing in new electric vehicles and improving the passenger experience by adding Wi-Fi, USB charging points, contactless payments, and improving the frequency of their services. There's also a strong focus on offering more flexible, better priced, easier to understand tickets. And in all of this, communication is key, and that's where we can help. At Passenger, we're constantly looking at ways of facilitating digital transformation to support our operators and their customers. During the pandemic, we launched a new feature that we call Enhanced Vehicle Information, and this shares information about the oncoming vehicle in real time. This includes capacity information, accessibility features, benefits on board to the passengers such as contactless payments, Wi-Fi, wheelchair availability. And for us, the agility and the speed that our engineering team were able to work as the pandemic started meant that we were able to roll out COVID communication quickly and efficiently across all of our apps and all of our websites for all of our operators. And we continue to enhance our offering on a regular basis to benefit all of the customers that we work with. As I'm sure we all know now, a big part of the national bus strategy is partnerships with local authorities. Organisations such as the Campaign for Better Transport have long said that local authorities are best placed to review local needs and work with operators to plan the services that best meet those needs. So it's good to see that the national bus strategy will require authorities to form enhanced partnerships with operators. Last year, we delivered an interlinked branded website for Hertfordshire County Council, and this was the first local authority to adopt an enhanced partnership with local transport operators in the UK. The interlinked website provides transport information with journey planning and real-time information across more than 25 operators in that region. We're always happy to deliver these types of initiatives for local authorities, and we do envisage rolling out more of these websites as well as mobile ticketing apps as enhanced partnerships become more commonplace. But as a company, we knew we had more work to do to support the industry as a whole. We've been working very successfully with medium to large size organisations with huge success. And we recognise that there are hundreds of smaller independent operators in the UK who also needed digital support. Often smaller operators are family-owned businesses where members work across functions and time and budget is precious. Often digital solutions such as mobile ticketing apps and journey planning websites are a stretch to the budget. And we knew we had to do something to help. So after extensive research last summer with smaller operators, and we classified smaller operators as having under 100 PBR, we developed plans to launch a new multi-operator app to bring our established transport technology to the smaller independents. With the industry in crisis due to the pandemic, the most important thing we could offer was offer a digital solution that was affordable, reliable, and easy to use, both for operators and their customers. So myTrip officially launched last October, and we now have approaching 50 operators signed up to the myTrip platform. We've developed myTrip with a huge amount of technological functionality, and it can achieve many of the objectives set out in the National Bus Strategy. In our aim to improve the bus travel experience and bring people back to buses, myTrip offers cashless and contact-free ticketing. This obviously helps to remove cash off the buses and gives passengers the convenience of being able to pre-purchase their tickets. It's easy to use. Everything we design at Passenger keeps the end user in mind, which is why we often get 5-star App Store ratings. There's a huge amount of tickets available, such as adult, child, monthly, weeklies, day tickets, and they are easy to find, easy to purchase, and easy to use. There's also a huge amount of flexibility with tickets. For example, operators can give carnet tickets to their passengers, especially useful for part-time commuters, which is likely to be our new way of working. There's the option of ticket gifting, so parents can buy school or student tickets for their dependents. We're already having several operators offer multi-operating tickets, which is giving better options for their passengers in their local area. And we hope to see more of this in areas such as York, Lincolnshire and Kent, where we already have several operators signed up to the myTrip platform. Live bus tracking is particularly useful for rural areas so that passengers can see that the bus is on its way. We're sharing capacity and social distancing information, so that helps to boost confidence and get passengers back to buses. And we're also showing vehicle and accessibility information, so showing if the wheelchair bay is free or whether the bus has free Wi-Fi or low floor access. So as we bring in more operators to the myTrip platform, we are creating a national network of independent operators onto the platform. If you look at this 24-hour visualization map of all our onboarded operators, which is about half of those signed up to the platform currently, you can see that we're building out a nice area of clusters in local areas, which can help support local authority initiatives such as multi-operator ticketing. For example, we're currently working in Essex for Essex County Council for the Stop, Swap, Go promotion with Stephensons of Essex, which is encouraging young people to take the bus. An initiative like this also includes other operators such as Go East Anglia, First and Arriva, and it works much better with digital capability, which previously many smaller operators didn't have access to. We also have other operators on the myTrip platform selling multi-operator tickets such as Red Rose, Red Line and Red Eagle, Chase Rider and Select Buses and Weirdow. As we bring in more operators, we hope to bring operators together to talk about how we can build that better together and learn from each other. We recently hosted our first myTrip forum in York for Reliance, Connexions and York Pullman, and together we brainstormed how to support their operations in York, which included multi-operator ticketing and how to promote myTrip ticket sales to schools and colleges. We hope to host more of these forums in the coming months as the myTrip network grows. Our aim is to help all UK bus operators transform their digital offering with confidence. So by moving to digital, independent operators can protect their drivers from having to handle cash. They can speed up boarding times. They can feel comfortable knowing that the system they are using is secure and PCI compliant. Many operators are reporting less fraud with the move to digital using dynamic QR codes and boarding codes. We're supporting all of our operators with Passengers Open Data Portal, and we can automatically update to the BOD system, saving time and resources. We're offering free marketing and promotional support because we recognise that smaller independent operators are busy and time is precious, so we're providing posters, social media posts and school packs. We've recently launched myTrip websites, which is helping to facilitate web to mobile e-commerce and offer better journey planning functionality for myTrip operators. And by moving to mobile, operators can rest assured that they're appealing to the next generation of bus users. This includes replacing plastic smart cards with digital tickets, which is not only better for the environment, but it also saves on distribution time. I'd like to share this quote from Chris Armand from D&G. Passenger has thought of everything. myTrip helps communicate accessibility features on board whilst protecting our drivers with cashless payments. This is the multi-operator solution that smaller bus operators have been waiting for. It's still early days for myTrip. We've only been in the market 8 months, but as we continue to roll out new features and listen to operator feedback, we know that myTrip will continue to get better and better and help to encourage bus patronage. We feel strongly that when operators, local authorities and suppliers work together in partnership, the strength of that collective knowledge is a force to be reckoned with. We can all achieve our aim of less congestion, cleaner air quality, and help to encourage a more active lifestyle by taking public transport instead of jumping into our own cars. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. If anybody would like to email me later or connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Can I remind you to keep your questions coming in? We'll take them at the end, but we've had quite a good selection. I will say one thing now. We've had a comment from one operator, Roland at Chalkwell, just to make Sarah blush. We've just gone live with myTrip. Passenger made the whole process really easy and we're very professional. So there you go. He's obviously after a discount as well. So without further ado, I'd like to move on to introduce our next speaker, who is Chris Cheek. Chris has worked in the public transport industry for over 48 years. That's even longer than me, goodness. The last 33 as an analyst and consultant. He's worked on a wide variety of consultancy projects across all modes of public transport, including a wide variety of bus projects, 10 light rail PFI projects and 7 rail franchise bids. He's currently working as an advisor to Transform Scotland, the alliance campaigning for sustainable transport in Scotland. Since 1991, he's edited major research publications on public transport that now form Passenger Transport Monitor, the online subscription service. In 2019, he published Understanding Buses, a clear, non-technical, jargon-free book explaining how the bus industry works, the second edition of which followed in May 2021. Other recent works have included the Bus Demand Jigsaw 2020, a major report on the factors which influence demand for bus services, published in May 2020, and Bus Industry Performance 2020, a review of the industry's market and financial performance in 2018-19. He writes regularly in Passenger Transport Magazine and Rail Professional Magazine, and has also published 5 novels. So, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can see my screen okay. I'm going to be talking a bit about the strategy in context of the financial analysis and the impact of COVID. That's me, nice picture of old bus. That's what I passed my PSV test on. I joined the National Bus Company an awful long time ago and worked in frontline management positions for 15 years before moving across to journalism and consultancy. And as you've just heard, writing and publishing, that's all good fun. So today's agenda, a quick look at where we were pre-COVID and where we are now, and then a quick look at the prospects for the future. The way we were, well, the last available pre-COVID quarter, rolling years to 31st of December 2019, it all seems an awful long time ago when a lot of water's flown under the bridge. But we'd seen that volumes peaked outside London in 2009-10 and in London in 2014. And over the subsequent 5 years, those are the losses. London heading the pack at 6.5% and the Met areas at 6.3, Shire's a bit lower at 4.5, and Scotland and Wales. Wales actually a small recovery, but it needed to because of losses earlier in the cycle. The main causes of decline, this was part of the analysis I did, for the bus demand jigsaw last year suggests that, and none of this is a surprise really, the factors include real-term fares increases, declining concessionary demand because of the reduction of the number of people qualifying for a pass, increased car ownership as ever, cuts in service supply, especially of course tendered services over the previous years, slower bus speeds, which we've all heard about, and of course the decline in shopping demand, which is something we'll come back to later. And of course all that has led to declining profit levels. These are the overall operating margins for Great Britain outside London, and shows that the target against a target of around 7.7 to 8%, given the current cost of capital, the industry is falling short. And we've already seen, and this will continue, I think, a decline in investment because the funds simply aren't there. And then, of course, this happened. We've seen 3 COVID lockdowns. As Claire was talking about earlier, strong government advice against using public transport, though there has been a gradual recovery as restrictions have been eased. And currently, according to DFT, it's back up in the bus industry, both in London and outside, to just over 60% of quotes normal. And hopefully there will be more recovery after the lifting of restrictions on the 19th of July. So from here on, the suggestion must be that the only way is up. Key stages in recovery were already achieved, getting the infection rate down, though it is rising at the moment. We've reduced the pressures on the NHS, and fortunately they don't seem to be rising. And we've achieved a fairly miraculous rate of mass vaccination. Still to come, as I say, the lifting of the restrictions, the easing and the withdrawal of social distancing that goes with it, that will put public transport capacity back to where it belongs. And hopefully, though we haven't seen it yet, the DFT will lift its advice against using public transport. But there are still lots of risks to come in this front, as the NHS advisors keep telling us there are risks about a winter surge. We already know from the last few months what new variants can do, and we can't rule those out in the future. But what then? Well, we know that life will never be the same again. The key issues are going to be about the economy, employment levels, disposable income, which of course has been virtually on hold for years, the shift online, both work, shopping and teaching, and the risk of changed public attitudes. And most of that can be looked at in terms of journey purpose. And national travel survey data from the DFT gives us an idea of what's at stake, and we can identify risks under each of those categories. And we'll have a look at some of them now. There are, to my mind, 3 broad categories of risk: social distancing, which we might be saying goodbye to, but not necessarily permanently. Then there's lifestyle changes and what happens in the economy. And each of the journey purposes we were looking at has its own particular set of risks against each one. Much is made, of course, of work and business. We'll look at that one first. According to stats from the labour force survey published by DFT, there were around 2.2 million bus commuters in 2019. This is the autumn quarter that it's based on. And you can reckon that that gave rise to just over 1 billion passenger journeys, and that was around 21% of all journeys. So roughly in line with the NTS figure that travel to work is about 20%. So the questions are: increased unemployment. Well, that was a great concern earlier in the winter and through most of last year as to how many, and it looks as if it's much less of a threat than we first thought. And indeed, there is a cry for more employees in many industries, including ours. So that's a concern which we'll come back to. How many can work from home? Well, if you look at the socioeconomic classification of bus users, it looks, and then relate that to industries and to employment in the types of jobs that people do, it looks as if around 57% of existing bus commuters could work from home. But of course, that raises the question, how many will? And, you know, probably up to 60% of those who can will, if their employers allow. And we know from all sorts of research that's going on that hybrid is the most likely model. So perhaps 2 days at home, 3 in the office, or vice versa. Now, if that came true, that would lose us around 115 million passenger journeys a year, or just over 11% of the volume of traffic in 2019, or 2.7% of the 2019 passenger journeys. That's not as bad as some people fear, and certainly not as bad as the railways, but then the railways are far more reliant on commuting than is the bus industry. Shopping trips, well, about 1.3 billion trips a year, and that's already fallen quite sharply since the turn of the century. And it was already forecast to fall further as more retail moved online. ONS numbers show that it had already reached 20% of total sales by the end of 2019. It peaked at 36% during lockdown 3 earlier this year, though the latest figures show that it's back to 27% in May. But there are problems going forward because the volume of store closures that has taken place during the pandemic means that there is a loss of facilities. There is a risk of a vicious circle of town centre decline. You know, if there are fewer shops, why bother going? And a loss of town centre jobs, which of course is, you know, those retail jobs were a good part of our travel to work market for the bus industry. And of course, we know that there will be fewer office workers in town and city centres, and they will further reduce trade, particularly for catering outlets. And we're seeing this already. The latest footfall stats from Springboard are showing that though there is strong recovery and apparently, and that footfall is way higher than it was this time last year when we were just beginning to see the easing from the first lockdown. In fact, if you look back to 2019 levels, footfall is still 25% below that. And that, if it carries on, will feed directly into bus trips. There are about 1.1 billion trips for leisure purposes. That includes sport and entertainment, casual dining, day trips and short breaks, and visiting friends and relatives. It should be strong from now on, and there are reports from all over the country of strong staycation demand, and that's likely to continue for the rest of the summer, noting in passing how typical it is of the English weather that we're having a wet and rather cloudy and damp summer rather than the glorious one we had last year. But there we are. And of course, we've still got the restrictions on foreign travel, and though they're going to come off, it's far from clear how much recovery there's going to be in 2021. So what can the independent sector do about this? Well, I think, as we've heard from Claire and the others, by maintaining quality, using PR, I think one of the things I noticed strongly around the country was that public perception of bus drivers during the lockdown last year changed markedly. And I think there is something there that we can build on. And innovation and promotion, we've already heard from Sarah about the work that is being done to digitize, bring the industry into the digital era, and particularly the independent sector, which is a great step forward. But we need to remember that we need to give people a reason to travel, and that's about destination marketing. And one possibility is to work locally with town centre businesses. And again, as Claire said, the independent sector's got huge advantages in having local presence and connections. and can bring those to bear in engaging with local authorities, being proactive on BSIPs, and presenting solutions and not problems. I think that's a very important point to make, that we need as an industry to be not saying to politicians, oh dear, what are you going to do to help us? But to say to them, you know, this is the blockage that's being caused by congestion. It's this junction or that junction. What can we do together to ease that blockage and help to promote pro-bus policies? And we need also, I think, to bring an understanding of local authority issues. There are terrific decision-making constraints on authorities, both in terms of approval processes. As Claire was emphasising, there is no money or not enough money, and the authorities are faced with increasing social care demands, which are only going to get worse as people like me get even older. And as we've also touched on already this morning, there is public resistance to pro-bus measures. And just picking up on Sarah's point about climate change, we know that the carbon budget number 6 has now been adopted by the government, published in December, and it requires us to deliver a 9% reduction in car miles by 2035, rising to 17% by 2050. Now, the Committee on Climate Change envisages that that will be done by reduced travel volumes, such as working from home and online shopping that we've been talking about already, and also by modal shift to active modes, walking and cycling, and to public transport. So to put that in some context, we know that in 2019, car, van and taxis accounted for 534 billion kilometres of traffic, which roughly translates from DFT figures into 738 billion passenger kilometres, with a vehicle occupancy of around 1.4. So if occupancy is unchanged, the shift in passenger kilometres we need to achieve is 66 billion by 2035 and 125 billion by 2050. It's quite a lot. So what does that mean? Well, the way it works is that you can calculate, based on the latest mode share stats from TSGB, the 1% of car demand switched, every 1% of car demand switched to bus represent a 23% increase in passengers kilometered by travel by bus, so that a 9% switch means a 203% increase, and a 17% switch is 384%, and the graph shows you the rising scale. Lots of questions about that, of course, not least of which is where would we get the staff from to man all these extra buses? And the second question, is it really politically feasible to expect governments to take the sort of courageous decisions that Bill was talking about earlier in order to make this a reality? Something about my 49 years in the industry and the experience of previous ambitions to improve public transport suggests not. So my conclusions, we've got some really tough times ahead, especially not if, but now when CBSSG is ended. There is no going back to where we were before COVID, and demand, I reckon, is likely to remain at 80 to 90% of pre-COVID levels. So that's going to require even more innovation and smart thinking by the industry. And as Sarah quoted me saying in a recent article, the modal shift in response to the net zero targets is likely to be the industry's saviour. But delivery of those targets is going to require dynamic customer-facing operators able to innovate and take risks, invest in zero emission buses, expand capacity to respond to growth, i.e. making a profit. It's going to require infrastructure investment to deliver the faster journey times that will make such a difference to all our lives and all our marketplaces. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to participating in the question session later on.
Thank you, Chris. That was a combination of stimulating, depressing, fascinating, sobering, and a few other adjectives that I can't immediately conjure up. Goodness me, we've got a challenge ahead, haven't we? And I suppose elements of that challenge are good, and elements are, well, challenging. Yeah. I look forward to the question and answer session later. On which topic, please do keep those questions coming in. We've got a fair number. So after Craig has done his bit, we will move on to the Q&A. So then, our final speaker today is Craig Temple. Craig studied at Leeds Metropolitan University. He became a management trainee at Blazefield Holdings. He worked briefly then in the haulage sector. He went to the dark side, but then in 2000 became operations manager at Rays of Harrogate, which was a 15-vehicle family-owned coach operator. In 2002, he started Harrogate Coach Travel with 4 vehicles, and the business has grown organically to its current 40 vehicles, assisted by his wife Julie as finance director. And the trading name changed to Connexions Buses in 2010. And as well as operating the main business, there is a collection of 8 preserved buses ranging from 1971 to 1995. So, once again, Craig, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Bill. Well, I'm Craig Temple, Managing Director of Connexions Buses, as Bill said. I apologise for the Chris Whitty style here. It's going to be a next slide, please, when I need it changing, so I apologise for that now. As Bill introduced me, we established the business in 2002 with 4 buses on just one route, and then we've grown steadily and organically to 40 vehicles now on a mix of commercial and tendered service. We operate within 3 county areas, so 3 separate BSIPs. We have West Yorkshire, North Yorkshire and City of York. And West Yorkshire is probably going to be the most interesting, as they have already committed to franchising. So we have large amount of school services. We run 19 school services. It's a huge part of our business that we've grown steadily. A large number of these are commercially operated. We serve 6 different schools, and in 2 of these schools, we are the only operator. We have great working relationships with the schools. It's something that we've worked very hard with. From my background, from my degree, which was in information systems, which obviously at the time I did my degree, the internet had barely even been invented. I've been quite keen to be at the forefront of any new technology. So we're now on our 2nd generation of ticketer machines. We've upgraded about 18 months ago now to QR and EMV enabled machines. We have used mobile phone tickets with a previous app provider since 2015, and we've also used tracking with a different app provider also since about 2015, which at the time was revolutionary, but looking back at it now is maybe a bit clunky compared to what you can get now. Can I have the next slide, please? So as we've grown as a business from the original 4 vehicles, we've kept a small, efficient team, very streamlined, which has enabled us to operate services commercially that other operators haven't been able to. So quite apart from Julie, who only works part-time, I've got an operations manager and an information systems manager. The 3 of us combine driving school buses and driving service buses with our office roles. So any new information technology systems that we have, we need to almost work independently with not a great deal of input from us, because we don't have the time and we don't have dedicated office staff looking after that. So as part of our local bus service, we ran a tendered service for First. It's now commercial, but we ran a tendered service for First for a couple of years. So we had good experience of First's tracking and mobile ticketing app. because our machine, we were using first bus ticket machines. So the first app was absolutely fantastic, really, really good. We were amazed with how good it was compared to the one that we previously had ourselves. So at that point then we started looking for replacements for our tracking and mobile phone app, preferably all in one place. We spoke to all the major app providers, and whilst the systems that they provided were absolutely superb, it was overkill for us with the size of our business, and I don't think there was one that came in at less than £10,000, which just put it well out of our price range. So we persevered with what we had. It's a shame that the ones that we had were, or that certainly the ticketing app that we had wasn't very secure, because as I'm sure you're aware, students, which is the largest number of users of our mobile phone ticketing, were students at the schools, and students are incredibly good at anything digital, and we had the most fantastic fraudulent tickets with no idea how much we actually lost through it, but it was obviously something that we're very keen to cap. So the security of anything that replaced our app was paramount. And obviously we've gone to QR coded ticketed machines, and we're using QR codes on our return tickets. So using a QR code is another level of security. We also needed a low startup cost because the other apps were prohibitive towards us. So from speaking to another local independent operator, Reliance, who we get on really well with, we were informed about myTrip, and we started chatting to Passenger probably in about July last year, I think, maybe a little bit before. And we were talking to them about adopting the myTrip, and the fact that it was a very low startup cost, it combined both of our previous apps into one, which came across very professionally. It really was a no-brainer. We signed up to it straight away, and it was great to be one of the original 10 launch operators for it. Have the next slide, please. Okay, so as I briefly mentioned there, the schools are a large part of our need for mobile ticketing. We operate 19 school services, but the ones that I'm going to concentrate on are the ones into the Harrogate area schools, which are our commercial services now, because the local councils over previous years have been able to reduce funding and then eventually eliminate the funding to faith schools. So they have a huge pull from out of the local catchment area. So between us and another 2 operators, when all this finished, we all got together with the schools, spoke about what services we were going to provide, and we then registered these services and basically took over seamlessly for the parents, except that they were going to have to pay for the tickets, where previously they'd got them free. So it was very important at the time for us to provide value for money, because they were paying for something they hadn't previously paid for. So we introduced Wi-Fi to our buses when we started the service. We used modern low-floor buses before PSVAR was legal for on-school services, and obviously we adopted our previous ticketing app, and it was well received by the parents, but as I said, we had an incredible amount of fraud with it. So it was obvious that we needed to change. The parents were quite demanding and still are, because they're paying a reasonable amount of money to get their children to school. Part of this is that they need a reliable service, and part of what we can offer now, which makes it better for them, is that they can now track the school buses. So a number of the services that we operate come in from relatively rural areas, and they don't have to stand at the bus stop for ages waiting for the bus if it's raining or whatever. They can track the bus, see where it is. It's in real time. They don't have to be at the bus for more than 3 or 4 minutes before the bus gets there, and it's great. We have had nothing but compliments from the parents about it. The mobile phone ticketing app is really good. As Sarah said, there is the option for the parents to buy and give the tickets to the students. So if they've got 2 students on the bus, they can just have one account themselves, buy the tickets, gift it to both students. So it's incredibly easy for them to use. It's very secure because it's QR code, as I said, which scan under the ticket machine. It also has a series of balls that run across a word of the day. So if you've got no QR code scanner, you've still got the security of the balls that go across the screen. It's easy for the drivers to read as well. And as far as I'm aware, we have not lost any money through fraud through it, so it's absolutely fantastic. It also portrays the quality image that we've been looking for the parents because of the money that they're paying. We need to portray this quality image for them. So also on this screen here, you can see that we have a number of vinyls internally advertising stuff on our service buses. The under 19 market, again, as I think Sarah said earlier on, is a very important market to us, not only through our schools, but we believe that the under 19s are the future of the bus passengers of the industry. And it's keen, it's obviously good and important that we need to provide them with a good service that's good value. At 17, they can drive a car. We don't want them to drive the car, we want them to travel on the bus. So we allow them to travel for half price and have done for a long time, up to the age of 19. They don't need any proof of ID or anything like that. It's something that we've done a long time before other operators. Our school passes that we sell are also valid on all of our local bus services. So if the students stay at school a little bit later, they can travel on our local bus services. And again, this is facilitated through the QR codes, which can then be programmed onto the ticketer to be read on the local bus services as well. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Just briefly, some of our marketing here, because the myTrip app comes with a marketing pack that anybody can access. And as you can see here, we've used some of the marketing from the marketing pack on our timetable, the X1 timetable there for our Harrogate and Knaresborough service. At the bottom, I've just lifted it straight from the marketing pack and put it on there. And another of the in-bus adverts there, which promotes our app. I've lifted it straight from there and put it on. And as you can see, they're very clear, precise, and to be fair, we probably couldn't do anything better ourselves, so that's why we use them straight off there. Okay, can I have the next one, please? Right, so I'll move on to York, which is obviously one of the areas that we operate in. York is a very, very pro-bus city. They're a fantastic local council to work with. As I said earlier, Reliance, who is one of the other independent operators in York, I think we're quite unusual in York that we've got a number of actual, well, ourselves and Reliance just purely bus. We don't do anything but bus, and we're independent operators. It's very unusual to find operators like ourselves now, let alone 2 in the same area. So with Reliance, we were part of the original 10 on the platform. Shortly afterwards, York Pullman came on board as well. So we took the opportunity here to have a photo shot to promote the fact that all the independent operators were on the same platform in York. We're all part of the Quality Bus Partnership in York, which is run by the council. And apart from us on that, we have big operators, all apart from Stagecoach, to be honest, are in the York area. So we've got Go Ahead through East Yorkshire, we've got Transdev, this First York, and we have Arriva that running from Selby as well. So it's a great cross section on the Quality Bus Partnership. And I believe all the operators that are part of the Quality Bus Partnership now use ticket-to-ticket machines. So again, as Sarah said, we've spoken to City of York Council as a group of smaller operators, and we are working to having the multi-operator tickets, which are called the All York tickets. We're working to have those available on the myTrip app so they can be used on any bus operators' buses, anybody within the area. Currently, they're paper tickets which are not able to be scanned on any bus, but as part of an agreement that we're working on, we will be able to have them read on any QR coded ticket machine on any operator's bus. This ticked a great big box for the national bus strategy, and also because York is a huge tourist destination. Those of us that have travelled quite well in continental Europe, you know that You can go to any city in continental Europe, you can buy A tickets and you know that you can use it on any bus or train in the area. And all the tourists coming into York, if they can go onto an app, buy a ticket, use it on any bus on a mobile phone, because this is what people expect nowadays, then it makes the transition for them much easier, and they are far more likely to use the public transport if they can do that. Can I have the last slide, please? So, summarising, our experience of digital and mobile ticketing and tracking is quite a long one. We've been doing it for 6 years now. Obviously, we had issues with the ones before, which have now been brought under one roof by using the myTrip app. It's been really good value for us. It's worked really well. To all intents and purposes, anybody using it doesn't know that we haven't spent £15,000 to £20,000 on our own app. The gifting of the tickets is fantastic. It's so easy. The parents use it really well, and the tracking is great. I'll use an example from last week. We had the A1 closed, where our depot is 3 miles from the A1. A lot of our services use the A1 to go out, and we had the A1 closed due to an accident. One of the school buses was caught up in the traffic and had been sat there. Well, it ended up being sat there for an hour and a half, not moving. So we managed to divert another school bus to go and do the service. But through myTrip and the tracking app, I was able to send out on our social media, parents of the X71 bus, please check myTrip to find out where the bus is. It's one of our more rural services. So the parents, I don't think we had one telephone call from parents asking where the bus was, because they could use the tracking app to find out where it was. I can't praise it highly enough. It's great. We currently have around about 600 school users using the myTrip app, and this is going to increase this year because we'll have all the annual ones on there as well. We missed it last year because the app didn't launch till October, so we'll have more. We also have a number of our local bus services on there as well. Anybody can download the myTrip app and you can see any operator's tickets and see what there are. It's very easy to use. We've also introduced our 10-trip tickets on there now due to the change of people's working. We used to only issue them from ticket machines, but they're all on there now. So it's very flexible, and again, like I said previously, people expect it now. So I think people that don't have it are at a disadvantage. I think, to be fair, that sums us up. And as I said before, the branding helps market the product. So that sums up our experience, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll be here to answer questions later.
Thank you, Craig. That was excellent. Okay, we've had quite a number of questions come in now, so I'll try and assemble them into some form of order so we can ask the panel their views. If the panel would now all like to turn on their microphones and cameras. Marvellous, thank you. There's a little cluster of questions. Perhaps Sarah could answer this, maybe Sarah and Craig. There's a little cluster of questions related to those of our customers who don't have access to smartphones, either only have an ordinary mobile or no mobile at all. And essentially, I think, the questioning is around how do we ensure that we still cater for those customers, both in terms of information provision and ticketing, where they're not either willing or able to use the sort of technology that perhaps younger customers are. Not necessarily age related, there might be other customers as well. Perhaps Sarah, perhaps you can give us your thoughts on that, and then maybe Craig.
Yeah, sure. I mean, our expertise is obviously on the digital side of things, so that's what we're hoping to promote through myTrip. There is a huge amount of the national bus strategy that is directly with the operator, and how they're communicating with passengers as well. So I presume like through timetables and other forms of communications on bus as well. So from our perspective, we're trying to do the best we can to make it as accessible as possible through the digital side of things, but we are totally aware that smartphone usage is growing, but it's not there yet.
Okay, thank you. Craig, any perspective on that from your view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, whilst the mobile and digital ways is the way forward for most people, there are always going to be people that won't or can't use it. So, you know, paper-based tickets are still going to be there, and promotion on bus, and I don't know, but the back of our buses is the best promotion for us. We don't have any adverts for anything apart from ourselves on our buses. So, you know, you can advertise to anybody through that. And then we have internal adverts on the bus. Obviously, those that can't access Facebook or a website, there is still information there. Plus, of course, printed timetables, which are never going to go away, despite what some people think. We print thousands of printed timetables still. So, you know, there are other ways of getting your message out there without using the digital platform, even though digital is going to be the most frequently used.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions, not directly related, but probably both best answered by Chris. So, Chris, question from one delegate. Is there a risk that the 3 days people will work in the office will be Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday to give themselves long weekends? And could this end up with operators being forced to reduce service frequencies, or I suppose on the plus side, running times on Mondays and Fridays? Pre-COVID, we were seeing reductions in patronage on those days.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, and it becomes a problem because, of course, you still have a peak. And you know, the peak is still going to determine the size of your operation. It's just that the peak is going to be even narrower and bring even less revenue in. So it is a risk. And I suppose the difficulty is knowing how this plays out and seeing how it plays out over time. And it'll take 3 to 5 years before it's established what the pattern's going to be. And then, of course, the nature of employment will probably change again because somebody will invent, you know, a robot clerk or something. So, you know, it's very fluid, but it is certainly a risk, and it you know, it won't do the industry's economics any good at all.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, sort of related, because it relates to the some of the numbers that you came up with, and it's this. Clearly, it's going to be a challenge for the industry to soak up 9%, 17%, whatever, of car travel. But surely quite a lot of that reduction will be achieved via journeys not undertaken alongside modal shift.
That's absolutely right. Yes, and it's got to for it to work. There's no doubt about that. But you know, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, on the one hand, even 1% car demand on the buses at the moment would be very welcome. And you know, I think you can do some calculations. You know, obviously, you've got a national average load at the moment of about 11, maybe lower in some areas. So obviously there is capacity on the existing network. Really good bus priorities could probably allow you to be 10% more efficient and reinvest that 10% of capacity released in additional services and so on. So, you know, we're some way down the line before it becomes an issue about how and where the capacity comes from and who's going to pay for it. But it is, you know, I think picking up on something, I was very struck earlier on when Claire said, we've got to be telling the politicians what this means and what we've got to do in order to deliver what they want to achieve. And I think this is part of it. You know, we've got to say, hang on, Mrs. Patel, you know, if you want us to expand services to take all these extra people, then you've got to allow us some sort of special status for immigration to make sure that we can staff the buses. I mean, if, as it appears to be the case, from all sorts of things people are saying, if we can't staff the buses at current levels of service, how are we going to do it in 10 years' time? So I think we've got to be upfront with everybody about what all this is likely to mean in time.
Yes, Thank you. Do either Sarah or Craig want to comment on that question, or should we move on?
The drivers issue, it's a massive problem. Obviously, we've had 14 months of no driving tests, which is part of the problem. And those of you that have seen in the trade press, you know, we got my eldest son through his license, and it was purely by fluke he even got his car test, to be honest. So if he hadn't got that, he wouldn't have been driving buses. He's currently out driving every day because we have a driver shortage. We're not dropping services, but we're covering them, but it's tight, and it's the same everywhere in the industry. And I think it's only partly caused by I mean, a lot of people will blame Brexit for it, but I think it's only partly caused by that. The other part of it is caused by by COVID and the shutdown of all the government industries. And it's going to take a very, very long time for it to get better. And the freeze on drivers' pay whilst we've been under CBSSG is something else that's not helped very much. We were due to have a pay increase the week lockdown happened. So that never happened because obviously we didn't know what was going to happen going forward. It's before CBSSG had been announced. So it all got put on hold. We did manage to put a pay rise in through other activities that we've been doing, apart from our normal activities. But we're still only on a comparative level with driving broccoli and cabbages around in a Tesco van, which they don't talk back and they're much less demanding than customers. So, you know.
And of course, there's been a lot of publicity over the last week or two about the haulage industry now being dramatically short of drivers. And that inevitably is bad news for us because generally haulage pays better than the bus and coach industry. So if they're short, there's inevitably going to be a shift across from some of our existing staff to them. Okay, another question here. Page 60 of the strategy envisages multi-operator ticketing everywhere. Is this achievable, and will operators nationwide agree to this proposal? Perhaps Craig, you might like to go first on that one. Sorry to drop you in it.
Yeah, as a smaller operator who operates in areas with other larger operators, when I read that, I thought, oh great, this is great. It's going to level the playing field up for us. It's going to be superb. It's something that I've pushed for a long time. Like I said, we have that with the service that we operate in Leeds because it was theirs anyway. That's already there, so we proved that it can work. But there's been reluctance from other operators, and it's something that we've been trying to push North Yorkshire County Council in particular towards doing. But I think all the legislation around it and the competition issues, it's worded in the document that the competition issues don't really matter with it, but it's very woolly, and I don't think anybody would want to put it to the test. But still, if we can get over that, from yours and my perspective, Bill, as smaller members and album members, I think it's hopefully, if it can be put through, it's great for us.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Thank you. Okay, we had a question about whether myTrip can handle rail ticketing, but perhaps but linked with that, there's a broader question, which perhaps Chris and Sarah might be able to comment on. Bus Back Better talks about bus rail integration. That old chestnut. What's your view of bus train connections and through ticketing? Chris, you've worked in both bus and rail sectors, so perhaps I could give you that thorny one to have a go at first, and then we'll let Sarah have a go.
Yes, I mean, it's a wonderful idea. You know, it's seamless journeys, you know, and I'm sure there are thousands of transport professionals out there who say, well, Switzerland's done it for years, why can't we? You know, there's a lot of truth in that, but actually in practical terms it is extremely difficult. You know, we have to go back to the fact that for many years bus and rail had a common owner. It was called the government, and we didn't manage proper integration between 1947 and 1996 or 1985, depending on which date you want to take. So, you know, why should we expect it now? And, you know, talking to people in the major groups who have also had common ownership for a number of years, you know, Great Western in Bristol and so on and so forth, all across the country, and yet we've stalled on this. I said to somebody the other week who raised this question, and this is particularly true about things like, does the bus wait for a late train, or, you know, on all this sort of thing. The problem is that in the end, neither bus passengers using railways nor rail passengers using bus are significantly large enough to merit upsetting or inconveniencing the rest of the patronage. And that's very true of everything. And, you know, I don't know how you get over that, but I think it is a major blockage.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And of course, we do have Plus Bus, which has been around for years and people tend to forget about, but is actually, whilst it's a basic product, is nevertheless a fairly effective one and relatively comprehensive. Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely conversations we've talked about as myTrip grows. Obviously, it's still very early days. Within our premium apps, we do integrations with bike share, for example. So down here in Yellow Buses and More Bus, we're integrating with Borough Bikes. We're integrating with Next Bike over in Cardiff. So we're definitely opening up the platform beyond bus. I think there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes when it comes to bringing in the train as well. I'm definitely happy to have a conversation with Plus Bus to see if that's an option and see how, you know, if they wanted to sell tickets within myTrip. But like I said, it's still very early days and we're still in that sort of development phase of where we're taking the product roadmap for myTrip.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question from a fellow operator for Craig. Craig, how do you see your business coping with a franchise in West Yorkshire and potentially and BSIPs elsewhere? It feels like a lot to cope with when, as Craig says, you're a small operation with managers also doubling up as drivers, and to a greater or lesser extent that applies to all operators and particularly the SME sector, I guess. But Craig, how do you feel about that?
Well, there's two ways to look at it, really. Like I said, City of York are fantastic with buses. They're quite happy with partnership. We've had quality bus partnership there for a lot of years. The communication between operators in York is really good and facilitated by the council. So we'll leave York alone. That's really good. North Yorkshire is one of those that has had its bus funding massively cut. So the tendered services are very few and far between, and many of them are run by their own transport side, North Yorkshire services. So actually getting communication with North Yorkshire, I thought was probably going to be quite difficult, but they've been very proactive with it. So the BSIP's already sorted with North Yorkshire. They're quite keen to talk to us all. We're having 2 weekly meetings, to be honest, which is more than we're having with anybody else. So hopefully North Yorkshire will be fine. Then we go on to the franchising, the elephant in the room with Metro. Obviously, I'm a product of the Margaret Thatcher era, so I'm a privatised industry kind of person, and my view, as you know, as you introduced me, I worked for Blazefield as a management trainee when Giles Fernley was the owner, and I believe I'm right in saying that the 36 service then was the first one to use any sort of proper route branding, and it was really good to be there at the time that all that was happening. So I personally don't see that kind of innovation happening under a franchise system, and I don't think it would have happened had privatisation not have happened. However, there is the train of thought that the franchising doesn't have to be a specific or the old school kind of franchising thing. It can be where you can be, you can get benefits from increasing passengers. rather than just providing a service and it doesn't matter what the number of passengers are. So there is the train of thought that if you promote the service well enough, use the typical like Blazefield style marketing, and you manage to grow the customer base, so then it does need more buses and you can increase the frequency of the buses, that there is a benefit to the operator from doing that. If that goes through to franchising, then there is a benefit to operators for it. Obviously, as a smaller operator, there's the worry that the commercial service that we've just taken over in Leeds could go to somebody else. We've worked hard over a couple of years to build it up, and pre-COVID, it was one of the few services in Leeds that wasn't actually losing customers. So it's, yeah, there's the worry of that. It's much more personal if you lose something. When you've got a smaller business, you'll understand that, Bill. But you've got to look on the bright side. They are doing a BSIP to start off with in West Yorkshire, moving on to the franchising afterwards. There is the possibility that with what's happening in Manchester, that the taxpayers realise how much more money it's going to cost them to have the ideal bus service, and there might be a kickback from every other taxpayer in the country to say, you know what, it's a great idea, but we don't want to pay for it. So we haven't necessarily resigned ourselves to the fact that it's going to be franchising yet.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on because we've got still quite a few questions and time is not on our side. One for Sarah here, mainly. Sounds great to have one app, but we have two PLC operators in our local authority area, as well as quite a few independent operators. How would myTrip work for us in this scenario without resulting in a multiplicity of apps being required for passengers?
So are they talking from a multi-operator ticketing perspective?
I guess so, although it doesn't specifically say.
Okay. I know one of the operators has recently put in a ticket into myTrip that is working across other operators, and they've got an agreement themselves on how that's going to work, as long as people are with Ticketer and they can look at the usage versus the sales. I think the local authority is going to work behind the scenes to distribute the money. At some point, maybe myTrip will end up being the app for the UK, who knows? That's a very distant future. But at the moment, we're trying to just sort of support the independent operators and bring our digital technology to them. If they can all start to work on tickets that work across services, that's obviously a good starting place.
Okay, thank you. Chris, have you got anything to say on that question?
I think we all recognise that that ticketing, integrated ticketing and multimodal and multi-operator ticketing, we've got to deliver somehow as an industry. Complicated and difficult it always is. I can remember even going back to Tramlink in Croydon, actually doing fully integrated ticketing of a new tram line was extremely difficult, and the same was true in Nottingham. So we've been through all the mill, as Craig was saying earlier, of the Competition and Markets Authority and its illustrious predecessors, and everybody bears the scars of all that. But I think at least we have got the position with the Bus Services Act where if a local authority signs off that this is in the public interest, then we can pretty much within reason do what we want to do. So I think there are huge opportunities ahead in this, and there is no doubt. Everybody bangs on about the success of Oyster, but it did deliver huge benefits, and the biggest benefit of all to me is that nobody really knows how much they're paying anymore. And if you did know how much you were paying to travel on the underground, you wouldn't go, but there we are. It does make a difference, this business, and I always remember Giles a few years ago when he was with First talking about the fact that people moan about paying £3.50 for a bus ticket, but they don't moan about £3.50 for paying for an overblown cup of coffee. And somehow we've got to restore all that balance.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A question from one of our Welsh colleagues. but it's a devolved administration question, really. Again, perhaps Chris to start off with on this one. Are we now at a point where varying political desires across the UK mean a different approach should be taken, or are we still able to ensure consistency across devolved areas with England is achieved? I think we've got a bit of divergence already in a sense, haven't we, Chris?
Yeah, and well, I think we've got to remember that, you know, the problems that faced by Scotland and Wales are different, and to an extent, it's inevitable that devolved government would take a different approach. I mean, if Wales, for example, you know, there's a bit across the bottom that's commercial and a bit across the top that's commercial, and the rest is full of sheep. And you know, that requires a different solution, and the deregulated solution to that, to provide commercial services in Mid Wales, was never really going to be sustainable. And so you've got to allow, I think, local, and the same is true in the Highlands. I think you've got to allow devolved government the opportunity to adopt a different approach. Now, whether we agree with that, and whether, you know, the tendency to believe that public ownership and control is the best solution for anything, I think, you know, those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s know that it isn't, and know what will go wrong. But I think we've got to let them find out, because, you know, history always repeats itself, but the price goes up.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll do one more question, because we are almost at 12 o'clock and we don't want to overrun, because we'll have the traffic commissioner chasing us. This is an interesting one. Perhaps all three of you could just comment briefly on this. A lot of priorities are outlined in Bus Back Better, but with clearly limited funds. Given how the strategy is outlined, which affordable elements do you think the government is looking to prioritise? And perhaps one could take a second part to that question, and that is which affordable elements, or in what priority, do you think we as an industry, and I mean the broader industry, including local authorities, should be prioritising? Sarah, I'll let you go first, so Chris has got time to draw breath. And then we'll go Craig, and then finally Chris.
Well,
you'd obviously say, Sarah.
Sorry, what did you say, Bill?
You'd obviously say mobile ticketing would be the absolute priority.
Well, I mean, that was our aim with myTrip. You know, we're only charging £495 to join the platform. It's incredibly affordable, and there's a huge amount of technological functionality that we're giving with it. So yeah, from our perspective, definitely myTrip.
Okay, excellent. Craig.
I think if we're thinking practicality, then like Sarah said, the mobile digital aspect is a way of doing the multi-operator ticketing quite cheaply and easily. We just need to get the big operators on board with it to do the same. So that's a fairly easy win, I think, if we want to tick the box quite quickly. But from an operator's point of view, purely an operator's point of view, and it's probably expensive, and it's probably one of the things that we looked at on the Buses Back Better and thought, you know what, we've only been asking for this for well, I've been running buses for nearly 20 years, but been in the industry since I left college virtually all the time. And one of the things we've been asking for is more bus priority. We had one bus lane in Harrogate, no buses ran down it, so it was taken out. That's all we've got in Harrogate. And bus lanes, the ability for them to put bus lanes in very, very quickly, if that actually comes off and if it can happen, that has got to be, in my view, the best way to get people actually on buses. Obviously, we need all the digital stuff there in the background for them to do it, because it looks better as well. But I'd love to think that would work.
Yeah. Okay. And Chris, final comments from you on that, please.
I can't add anything to what Craig said. It's about journey time, and it's about predictability of journey time. And you know, one of the great arguments for digital ticketing is that it will reduce boarding times. And you know, prior to that, in the early days of smart cards, boarding times were going up, not down, and that was a major issue. So, but it's also about predictability. If we advertise that the bus from Knaresborough to Harrogate in the morning is going to deliver you to work in time to get to work at 9 o'clock, but on 3 days a week it's sat in traffic and doesn't get there till 10 past, then people aren't going to use us. So it is journey time and predictability. And if I had a slogan on the wall, it would say, "It's generalized cost, stupid."
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I shall use my chairman's prerogative to say that I wholeheartedly agree that it has to be bus priority. It has to be improving journey times. That's the one big factor. But it's also going to be one of the most difficult to achieve, of course, in terms of road space and politics. Okay. Thank you very much to all our speakers, to Craig, to Sarah, to Chris, and of course to Claire, who's gone. Thank you to Sarah a second time, wearing her passenger hat, for being the sponsor for this event. Thank you to Landor for organising it. There will be an on-demand recording, whatever that is, sent to all delegates after this event and posted on YouTube. Just a few closing comments from me, I guess. I think we can all agree that was a fascinating canter through some of the issues we face in trying to make Bus Back Better a reality. It's very easy for politicians to come up with these plans, but it's the industry, that's us, local authorities, consultants and operators who have to somehow try and deliver it, and our suppliers, of course, like Passenger. I think, though, that what our four speakers have said today definitely provides us with food for thought. Local transport authorities, operators, consultants are all going to have to work to understand each other's problems. The question of funding is clearly an issue, but equally the vision will require a change of mindset for many local politicians who are often wary of anything that can be perceived as anti-car. And to be frank, it's probably also going to involve a change of mindset for a lot of us, whether we be local authorities or operators. There will be a minefield of new and previously uncharted discussions on fares, routes, frequencies, branding, ticketing, journey times, infrastructure, vehicles, propulsion types, and so it goes on. And we'll all have to get accustomed to those quite regularly. But I hope you've all found today useful. As I say, thank you to the speakers, and thank you to the over 200 people who have listened in, watched, and given us many, many questions. I'm very sorry we haven't had a chance to get through all of them. There are loads of questions we haven't had a chance to put to the panel, but unfortunately 2 hours is 2 hours. So thank you to the audience. Thank you once again to everyone I've already said thank you to. I've been told to remind the audience that you can view Landor's upcoming events by visiting transportextra.com. Unfortunately, I'm not on commission for this plug. However, I would say to all independents, or all operators listening, if you're interested in myTrip, speak to Sarah. I'm sure she'll be happy to talk to you offline. And if you're an independent operator and you're interested in joining Album and you're not currently a member, then speak to me and I can put you onto our administrator. There we are. I've got one plug-in for Album. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking part. We are pretty much spot on 12 o'clock. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much.